morning. Thank you very much. The presentation originally here has been announced as the seventh tower, and that is the default title for a presentation which I've given countless times, mostly to audience which I would characterize as uninitiated. That is, usually I'm addressing people who have never heard about Building 7 and who believe that United States was attacked by 19 Muslim hijackers under the conduct of Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and that these 19 Muslims were able to get on 4 passenger planes without getting a ticket, without acquiring any boarding passes, after they had outfoxed 16 United States intelligence agencies and getting past all video cameras in the airports, eventually overtaking 8 adult, mature airline pilots, 4 of whom had served in Vietnam, and do that so swiftly and elegantly that none of them was able to push the hijack squawk code, which is 7700, which means that the airliner is hijacked. None of these 8 pilots got around doing that before they were overtaken by these pilots. Some of them had never actually been into a Boeing cockpit before, and they were able to slamming 2 of them at 960 miles per hour into the World Trade Center towers, the Twin Towers. And at this speed, one of them, before hitting the towers, he's telling his co-pilot, please take the wheel because I have to throw out my passport. And he's rolling down the window, he's taking out his passport, and he's putting it out, rolling the window up again, and then slamming the airliner at 660 miles per hour into the North Tower. If this was the plot of an action movie, it never will be, but if it was, the audience would run to the box office yelling for their money back. And you know this. So if I gave my usual presentation, I know I would be preaching to the saved and you would be bored to death. Instead, I have chosen to make up a little cocktail here, which I will call 9/11 Consensus and Beyond. That is, there are 3 kind of ingredients. First, I will take a different take on some of the fundamental evidence, hopefully providing you with some arguments and eventually some insight. So when you come back to your local communities, you will be better equipped to answer some of the frequently asked questions. And I will come up with some maybe funny little things related to the core evidence. And in the end of my presentation, I will also offer you some new stuff related to the nanotechnology presentation which was given yesterday and all the healthcare issues which has also been raised so profoundly during this excellent conference. First, I would wish to draw your attention to a new website which was established last year by David Ray Griffin and Elizabeth Woodworth. It is called The Consensus Points on 9/11. And it is thought to be a vehicle for those of us who fight the ignorance in the mainstream media and among our fellow citizens. That is, what can we agree upon? And the procedure is that they established a panel of what you may call experts, at least persons who had looked so profoundly into 9/11 So they more or less knew what happened on that day. And then a point is drafted in the form that of a claim. It is claimed that. So, and what is the evidence? And then we suggest the best evidence, and this is discussed back and forth by the panel members. It varies a little bit. At present, there's 19, and then it's reviewed and it's reiterated actually 3 times until everybody agrees that this is the best evidence. And then it's presented on this webpage. There are now 29 points up. That is, this is something that we can rely upon. If there are any, there are issues about Pentagon, or there are topics, subjects which are being discussed, it is not included. This is what we can agree upon. Solid evidence. And I will use 8 of these 29 points as stepping stones for my presentation today. That is, I have picked up 8 of these points, not necessarily bringing to you the same arguments which are used on the Consensus Points panel website. I will take my own approach, but I've used 8 of these points as key points for my presentation. And the first of them is this is the address of the web point, and here is the procedure. It is an established survey method in the medical sciences that you have a panel and they evaluate the data blind to each other. So nobody knows what the other guy says, and eventually only the organizers knows all the answers, and then they try to produce the consensus text, which is what we will present. Now, 2 of the points here relates to the Twin Towers. And one thing is a claim about the destruction of the Twin Towers impact jet fuel and fire only. I'll first give an overview of the 8 points which I will cover today. So these are 2 points about the Twin Towers, about how they were destructed. So this is a typical claim. Somebody says that, the government eventually, that the Twin Towers were destructed by impact, fire, and gravity only, and we will look at that argument and eventually argue against it. So here are the 3rd and the 4th claim that I will I'll discuss. And the next 3 claims relate to World Trade Center 7 and how that came down. And at the end, as my last point, I'll address some health issues related to the dust after having considered this claim that the World Trade Center contained no thermitic materials, as was said by the official authorities. So this is the first claim. Wait a second. Okay. The first 2 claims out of 8, actually this is a mistake. A claim that the destruction of the Twin Towers were due to impact jet fuel and fire only. And this claim came from the National Institute of Standards and Technology in their report in 2005. We will first take a look on the jet fuel, because this is something which comes up very frequently, at least when I'm giving the presentation. How about the jet fuel? Because everybody was told that the jet fuel on that day was responsible for melting the steel in the towers. And for doing that, let's review actually what the impact of the airliners looked like.
It was 8:46 in the morning.
And then we heard a plane come over, and in Manhattan, you don't hear planes too often, especially loud ones.
Let me also hasten to say that please, any questions that may come to your mind, come up with them during my presentation. Let's take questions on the fly. I mean, we've got to know each other quite well already, so let's make this a little bit informal. Is that a question on the last row? No, I can repeat it. Oh, it's a very diverse, actually, panel members. There are two chemists, there's a physicist, two chemists, a lawyer, and two engineers, a military man. Should we go to the website and check them out? I don't remember, actually. Here are the panel members. Yeah, Robert Bowman, he's an engineer. David Chandler is a physicist. Giulietto Chiesa is an Italian journalist. Dwayne Dietz is also an engineer. Todd Fletcher, I'm not quite sure. He's from Berkeley Environmental Science. David Gabb, Air Force retired pilot. Yours sincerely. Stephen Jones is a physicist. Commander Ralph Karlstad, he has spent 23,000 hours in airliners. Graham McQueen is a peace activist. Massimo Masucco, he's an Italian filmmaker, actually brilliant. Dennis McMahon, I'm not sure I know. He looks like a lawyer. Aidan Monahan, yeah. Aidan Monahan, electronic engineering. Roland Morgan is an author. He's written a brilliant book, actually, together with Ian Henschel. Francis Shure, retired business owner, etc., etc. Dennis Sunyatas is a famous actor. Matthew Witt, Weisbuch, from etc. These are the kind of people. They're quite diverse. Of course, they have a different approach on 9/11, but together it's a very broad, knowledgeable panel, in my opinion. So please come with the questions on the fly. I don't mind. What you saw here, of course, was the impact of the airliner of the North Tower 14 minutes before 9 on September 11th. And I'll just play the second impact as well.
We've seen it from the front angle before, but not from this angle.
You saw the fireball? That was the jet fuel. Gone in a split second. We'll say 95%. Eventually 5% went into the building, of course. But the lifetime of the jet fuel which went into the building, this minor amount, and that set off the fires, is roughly between 3 and 10 minutes. NIST says 10 minutes. I have seen professionals saying 8 minutes. I've seen professionals saying 3 minutes. So let's say 5 minutes. And jet fuel is like kerosene, it doesn't burn very much. So the kerosene is out very early on, and the official report doesn't count on it either. So this is the answer you should give people who believe that the 90,000 tons steel in the Twin Towers was melted from the jet fuel. Another thing, so what is in the report actually about the impact of the airliner, according to NIST, according to the official story, is that the major consequence of the airplane impact was that it stripped the steel structure of its fire protection. It doesn't really, it's say, if it had been for the mechanical damage only, the building would have been standing. So it all boils down to the fires. And fire and gravity only. So this is, the problem with that explanation is it's without precedent. It has never happened before in history that a steel frame high riser, and this is what we're talking about here, has collapsed due to fire. And then still officially they claim it happened 3 times on the same day. But this argument is much more fundamental and much more basic than usually considered, because science is based on experience. You make observations, you do experiments, and you draw conclusions, and it all builds in your conception of events. If an event has never happened before, it is unthinkable. So you cannot imagine that this building would come down due to fire. And strangely, it happens nevertheless to the Danish Prime Minister on this day. And now I'll show you a clip which I guess many of you are not very familiar with.
På samme tid træder daværende statsminister Poul Nyrup Rasmussen ind i statsministeriet for at holde et sikkerhedsrådsmøde.
Nogenlunde i det øjeblik, jeg træder ind i statsministeriet, får jeg at vide, at det første tårn er nu helt kollapset. Jeg får en melding, jeg tror 5-10 minutter før det fysisk sker, at nu er der overhængende risiko for, at tårnene kollapser. Så jeg vidste, at katastrofen var på vej, og får det så endelig bekræftet i det øjeblik, jeg træder ind, tror jeg, i huset.
What's happening? Somebody tells the Prime Minister 5 to 10 minutes before the building collapses that it is about to collapse. This is impossible. Because as I told you, the thought is unthinkable, is unimaginable. Not the most experienced construction engineer in the world would swear that the building remains standing. Firemen, when they come to a fire in a steel frame high-rise, they walk into the building, they run up the stairs, they extinguish the fire, and they know. They're brave, but they're not suicidal. They don't go into a building if it's supposed to collapse. So nobody can conceive that the building will collapse, and still our Prime Minister is being told 10 minutes prior to the collapse that it's going to collapse. I sent a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act, to the department, asking for all documents, all messages, all telephone calls, all cables between the department and American authorities on that day, and I was told that there wasn't any. I haven't had time to pursue this obvious fat track, but that was what I got, which means that the message given to the Prime Minister must have come from the intelligence. Why is this happening? Our Prime Minister, excuse the expression, is being primed. He's being told what to see in a little while. If he had not received this message, he would have watched the screen and said, why on earth are they blowing up the Twin Towers? Instead, he said, oh, now it's collapsing because somebody told me that would do. And be sure that every Prime Minister within NATO has received the same message prior to seeing actually the event on the screen. There was a question over here. This is from the Danish radio. This is from the Danish radio program called 24 Hours, I Never Forget.
Yes. But according to Danish television, Mr. Nyrup attends Bilderberg meetings.
Of course, every Prime Minister in the world has attended a Bilderberg meeting, which is not relevant for my story. Now, so here is another claim that it's a different claim, that the destruction of the Twin Towers is due to impact, fire, and gravity only. And again, I'm now referring to the report on the Twin Towers from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Do you think that NIST is actually covering the collapse of the towers? It is a report of 14,000 pages. Most of it, believe me, is hot air and dead meat. But you can read the basic report. But now I'll show you the most important, in my opinion, the most important footnote in modern history. And it appears on the bottom of page 82 in the summary. It's footnote number 13, and I quote, "The focus," because this is chapter 6 of the NIST report, and it is called the probable collapse sequence. And you start reading it with great expectations. Now they're going to tell us how the tower collapsed. But as you go through chapter 6, you realize that they are not going to tell us that. Instead, here comes what the admission, they're saying, the focus of the investigation was on the sequence of events from the instant of aircraft impact to the initiation of the collapse for each tower. For brevity, in this report, this sequence is referred to as the probable collapse sequence, although it does not actually include the structural behavior of the tower after the conditions for collapse initiations were reached and collapse became inevitable. Notice the academic, technical way of packing things in here. It's typical for the NIST report. They're using every conceivable dirty academic trick to cover up the crime. They're falsifying the data, they're omitting the data, they're making mistakes, deliberate errors. But this is what they're saying here, is that they are not covering the collapse. The timeline stops before collapse, after conditions for collapse initiation were reached and collapse became inevitable. It probably takes some training to actually go read behind the words, but that's fine. They're not covering the event they're being paid to explain. When I read this footnote first time, I laughed out loud, because this was a message from the hundreds of brilliant scientists and NISTs to their colleagues saying, we know this is rubbish, but we got bills to pay, okay? And I love, in particular, the expression for brevity, because this is what Winnie the Pooh would have said. For brevity, we call it the collapse sequence. And allow me to switch a little bit to Danish, because Peter Plys, which this is what Winnie the Pooh is called in Danish. Peter Plys would have said, for nemheds skyld kalder vi det kollapssekvensen. Thank you. All right, another consensus point which we address on our website is the claim that there was no explosions in the Twin Towers. This I would like to respond to, and with a simple, ask you just to use your own eyes. I'll play a video by David Chandler, a brilliant high school teacher in California, who took a little part of the collapse of the North Tower, and he's looping it again and again, and eventually moving our attention to different aspects of the collapse. And this is usually a game stopper when I'm doing my presentations. I stop it after about 3-4 minutes. He's a wonderful, wonderful teacher.
The starting point in science is observation. What you are seeing here is what happened to the North Tower of the World Trade Center, the second of 3 buildings to collapse on 9/11/2001. I use the word collapse, but words can be deceptive. What do you really see happening here? There's a tremendous amount of falling debris, but under the canopy of debris, do you see the rapid sequence of explosive ejections of material? Some of the jets have been clocked at over 100 miles per hour. I will call them explosions because it's hard to find other words that describe what we are seeing here. The explosions are not isolated and few. They are continuous and widespread. They move progressively down the faces of the building, keeping pace with the falling debris. Perhaps you can imagine a natural cause, but I can't. Notice that the explosions are occurring on multiple floors at once, over a wide zone, not in a floor-by-floor sequence that might be explained by pancaking collapse. Notice there are explosions far below the point of collapse. Some are isolated and focused. These are often referred to as squibs and are commonly seen in controlled demolitions. However, this is not a standard controlled demolition. The building is being progressively destroyed from the top down by waves of explosions, creating a huge debris field. The destruction is in waves, not just in one wave. Most obvious is a rapid sequence of explosions near the visible corner of the building. But simultaneously, we can see another wave of explosions much further down the face of the building under the canopy of falling debris. Notice that both waves of explosions progress down the face of the building, nearly keeping pace with the falling debris just a few feet away. Slabs of concrete did not fall to the ground and smash to dust. There is almost no concrete in the rubble pile. Notice that the concrete is being forcefully ejected outward from the sides of the building, already pulverized to dust. Notice that embedded in the dust clouds are huge girders and entire sections of steel framing that are being hurled out of the building. The horizontal speed of some of the girders has been clocked at over 70 miles per hour. Some of these girders impale themselves in the sides of neighboring buildings. Some landed as much as 2 football fields away from the base of the tower. What could hurl heavy girders with such force and give them such speed? Some people have suggested that the weight of the tower crushing down on the girders caused them to flex, and they sprung sideways by a spring action. But we are not seeing isolated jumping girders. We are seeing a major fraction of the mass of the building, steel, concrete, office furniture, and the remains of human beings, reduced to small pieces of rubble and fine dust, and being explosively ejected in all directions. Bone fragments are found on the roofs of adjacent buildings. The bones were not crushed in the falling mass, or they would have been trapped in the debris pile. They were pulverized along with everything else and blown out in all directions. The NIST investigators have claimed that the top section of the building above the plane impact point came down like a pile driver, crushing the undamaged lower section of the building all the way to the ground. The top section of the building is, however, noticeably absent. There is nothing above the ring of explosions except for a fountain of debris. Can you see a pile driver?
These are tremendous forces in action here. Some of these girders were multiple tons. This is between 12 and 14 tons, the steel beam, which is thrown like a spike across the street. Another picture here, we see 4-ton sections being thrown 200 meters into the building on the other side of the street. It's enormous forces. And you've seen these fragments being not even thrown horizontally, but some of them actually being thrown upwards. And maybe it's fitting to remind us, everybody, that gravity is going downwards, okay? So we have an obvious problem here. Or the official conspiracy theory has an obvious problem here. Next, this was, here I was addressing the claim that there were no explosions in the towers during collapse. But there were also multiple explosions in World Trade Center during the day. And what happened is actually that the the fire department chief, he actually collected 500 firefighters 1.5 weeks after the event, 2 weeks after the events, sat them down one-on-one in front of a microphone and told the firefighter, just tell your story. There were no questions. There were no questionnaires, nothing to fill out. Just empty your heart and your memory, tell your story. 500, roughly the total number. Out of these 500, 123, and this has been very thoroughly investigated by Graham McQueen, who is another member of the consensus panel from McMaster University, Hamilton, Canada. He has read all these testimonies, through all of them. 123 of them are reporting explosions prior to the collapse, even some of them prior to the impact of the airliners. There's a very famous man called William Rodriguez, who was in the basement. He was a janitor, And he experienced explosions prior to the impact, and he's been traveling around the world telling about this. He witnessed for the 9/11 Commission 2004 when they came out with the report, but his testimony was not in the final report, etc., etc. If you go into on the web, there's a Danish activist who has collected what on Danish national television was said on the morning. And there you see Jens Claus Hansen, who was a contra-admiral from the Defense Department. You will see Kjell Hellingsø, who was actually commanding the north part of the NATO treaty on the day. Distinguished journalists like Jens Nauntofte and others talking about explosions on the day. But what happened to the press, this is a completely different presentation. What happened to the press is during a day and a half, roughly, they all fell into line to the official conspiracy theory. So there was countless explosions during the day. Why? We don't know. And many things, when you start looking into this, you realize that many things did not go as planned. And so but it is a fact that there were many explosions. Now let's turn our attention to Building 7. And just, you have seen this countless times, very short. Just remind yourself.
It's gone, man. 17 down?
I'm sure all of you know. Pardon? What's happening?
The picture was wrong as we turned.
Did you see it? No? Oh. But you can't see this too much. This is the most important event in my mind. There's been a lot of subjects coming out on this conference, and you may notice that what happened, there is a time prior to 9/11 and there's a time after 9/11. And in my conception of the whole thing, everything is converging into 9/11. And what's happened after 9/11 is diverging into 9/11. No matter which field you address, it is connected somehow, it's all going through 9/11. All the degradation of our human rights, the economy, the environment, everything has been made possible due to 9/11. So in my opinion, 9/11 is kind of key to the whole thing. Not necessarily in terms of course and consequence, but in terms of enlightening our society, which is absolute necessity to avoid the catastrophe. So 9/11 is key, and this, what you just saw, is key to 9/11.
It's gone, man. 17 down?
Because I would like to quote John McIlvaine, who lost his son actually in the North Tower. He said, "This time they fucked up. This time they went too far," which is true. Yes?
And then suddenly it shakes and it's taken.
Yeah.
Sorry. The camera angle here is very steady, and it seems to be as if it's a news camera that has been just steadily watching this building, and then it collapses. But then suddenly there's
shaking. The building is shaking.
There's an editing, and then there's the audience or the people watching that say, "Oh, it's gone."
Yeah.
As if it's like a cut between the two. This sequence of this camera was also very mysterious, wasn't it? Because who put it there and why? As if to document something.
There are about 5, 6, 7 actually, eventually 10, depending on quality, what you accept of the collapse of this building.
Okay.
But this is the most used clip, and it's a little dangerous because the kink you see on the roof line is usually considered as a downward kink. It is not. It is an inward kink. And that actually is the origin of a mistake in the NIST report. I'm getting a little technical now, but if you watch Building 7 going down on a distance, you'll see the roof line remaining perfectly straight as the building come down. It's completely symmetrical. This I could spend a long time doing, talking about. I will not, but I would love to give you a handle on this event, and this is the speed by this, when this come down. First, let us repeat, no steel frame high-rise has ever collapsed due to fire, which is end of story actually, and I could cut off my presentation now because we're finished. As I have told you already, it means that there's no way this could happen that day. NIST saying, but it still happened that day, so we have to maybe stay a little longer. So one thing is that I will take out from another of our consensus point, namely the claim in this draft report. Later they had to admit this, but in the draft they said that Building 7 did not come down at free fall acceleration. And again, David Chandler, the high school teacher, has taken the effort actually of taking a close look on how the building came down, is monitoring what is the northwest corner here in a program called Tracker, and monitoring this point where it is coming down very accurately. You can do that, there are 30 frames a second in a video, so you have an internal clock, you know exactly how fast it's going. This is a little physics, I apologize. What you see here is the velocity, the speed of downward motion as a function of time. This is times. So the building is coming down. These are the points of the northwest corner here, etc. So it's, for example, after 2 seconds, the downward speed is roughly 14 meters per second. At 3 seconds, it is roughly 24 meters per second. That is, the speed is increasing. And increasing speed is acceleration. And you see here the speed from here to here is increasing constantly. All these points are lying on a perfectly straight line. And the steeper the line, the faster is the acceleration, is the speed. And so you get the acceleration here, you can measure the angle here at 9.88 meters per second squared. You don't have to remember this number, I will. Another thing you have to appreciate with this curve is that it discontinues here. It goes from rest and then down this line here. So I asked a guy who knows stuff about how things move in our physical world. So Isaac Newton is the founder of modern science, or not quite true, but he wrote a book in 1687, which is considered the most important book in science. We abbreviated, we call it Principia. It is about how things move. He had written it actually quite a bit earlier, but he didn't dare to pull it out the drawer because, you know, Galileo had been treated very unkindly by the Catholic Church in 1633 for actually reporting what he saw, which was dangerous at the time. But eventually in 1687, he came out with this book, and this is so made him famous. And I said, what does it mean that the speed is constantly increasing? He said, this is constant acceleration. I said, we found an acceleration of 9.88 meters per second squared, and he said, this is free fall. And what does he mean by free fall? This has been taken literally. It means that the object is falling freely, and he had been studying gravity, as you might know, in the 1660s, and published the famous laws of gravity already at that time, so he knew about gravity. The beauty of this story is that the formula, the relation between the height of a free fall and the time it takes was already established by Galileo, because he had fun throwing things out of the tilting tower in Pisa and recording how long time it took for him to fall to the ground. So he actually was the one who discovered that the height of a free fall is proportional to the time squared. Newton came up with the constant here, which is called the gravitational constant. But it makes it very easy for everybody coming after them to calculate the time of a free fall. And I did that some time ago with my pocket calculator and found out that the time for free fall from 2 meters is 0.66 seconds. So now I'll make a little presentation here, experiment. I'll subject my hairbrush to free fall from 2 meters. I count to 4, I release it on 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it did indeed hit the ground before I said 4. And if you had been very quick with your iPhone or whatever you're carrying, you would have measured 0.66 seconds. This is a fundamental observation, and I'll dwell a little bit on this to make sure that you all appreciate it. Yes, because it means that the 47th floor, building 7, was 186 meters high, 47 stories. So if a person had been standing on the 47th floor and released a ball, a stone, or an apple out the window at the moment he or she began moving, the stone would fall at exactly the same rate as the 47th story. We are 2 meters up in the bund. And there's a little video here illustrating this.
The ball has started to drop, yet 7 World Trade is still above the starting line. At the 1 second mark, 7 World Trade and the ball are still even.
Difficulties around the area. New Jersey Transit outbound.
7 World Trade indeed falls 100 meters in 4.5 seconds.
What we are dealing with here is a fundamental and unbreakable principle of physics called the conservation of energy. I have to make sure that you all appreciate the difference between kinetic and potential energy. When my hairbrush is lying here on the floor, it doesn't go anywhere. So this is 0 energy. And now I do work. I work on my hairbrush, and I investigate my own muscles and force, and I lift it to 2 meters height. Now my hairbrush has potential energy. And that potential energy can be used if I had put a little string on it and put it around a wheel, and it can be used to do work. The work I have invested in the hairbrush can be used again, okay? But if I release it, it goes into fall. So the potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. And since it is a maximum investing in kinetic energy, it's going into free fall. It means that all the potential energy of the 47th floor is going into accelerating it. That means that there is absolutely no energy left for breaking the steel beams. It's completely, all the potential energy is used to accelerate the object. There is no, I spelled it out, 0 energy for disrupting the steel structure. There is no way Building 7 could have come down without somebody else has done the work of taking the steel structure apart. That is, using incendiaries and explosives. There is no way around that, even though what they claim. Yeah, thanks. Okay, I could have shown a picture here of the steel structure of Building 7 because it's quite impressive. Instead, I will show just a short loop of the video you have set here, where you can actually see the explosions if you care. You can see them going from bottom up. And the story of Building 7 is obviously different from that of the towers. The towers were blown up from top down, but Building 7 was taken down from the bottom up. And this is both of them are masterpieces in engineering. I mean, what would an illusionist, what you call tryllekunstner, what is that called in English? Illusionist? Yeah, imagine that they have to take down 3 high-rises while 1 billion people are watching live and nobody noticed. It's a masterpiece. Every magician would just say, beauty. And beyond that, even there were no rehearsals. There were no reruns. There were no, hey, let's take it again, buddy. No. So they had some kind of nerve. Also, the last part of my talk, I think I have some time, is related to the dust. And we will also touch upon some health aspects of this dust thing. And there were plenty. An estimate is 750,000 tons of dust were eventually spread over Manhattan. I think that estimate is a little high, actually. So let's say 500,000 tons of dust lying all over. Everything was pulverized, except for the steel structure, which in itself is an unambiguous proof of a controlled demolition, because this is what happens when you blow things up with explosives. If you take a piece of concrete and throw it out the window, it falls to the ground, and then what? Then nothing. Maybe it cracks, but it's not being pulverized. And the only concrete actually in the building was that on the floors. It is between 40 and 90,000 tons. It's very hard actually to estimate how much concrete was in the buildings. Here you see plenty of dust, and Building 7 standing in the middle of it. Now, here you see a scientist, which I do want to give credit for what I'm going to tell you now. No, he's not watching, but if he was watching, I want you all to show your appreciation for the pioneering work by Professor Stephen E. Jones from Brigham Young University. Because here you see him having received actually a batch of World Trade Center dust. And what he's doing is he's taking out broken glass and stuff, looking it together with a colleague. And then if you take a plastic bag with the dust and you take a very strong permanent magnet, you pull it along the plastic bag, along with the magnet comes actually quite a lot, something obviously visible to the naked eye. And this is some of the stuff which comes along with the magnet. And we'll zoom in our interests on some of the particles which are perfectly round. When somebody comes along with a magnet, it means that it contains iron. But some of these particles are perfectly round, and question is, how can, this is an electron microscope picture of the World Trade Center dust, the raw dust, where you see the uneven particles here are what you would expect from pulverized concrete. This is fine. But as I told you, these round particles, this is a close-up, they come along with the magnet, that is, it's iron. But how can an iron particle become completely round? There is only one explanation for that. That is, sometime in its thermal history, it has been a liquid, a droplet. Because liquids have something called surface tension, meaning that when a drop is up flying, it automatically, by laws of nature, becomes completely round. It goes for the droplets, and if you take a close-up of a fog, or if you take the fat particles in your skim milk, they're completely round. Same phenomena. So Jones, no, I don't, yeah. So actually I'm missing a picture here. So this is a solid indication of the application of something called thermite during the destruction of World Trade Center. And thermite is a chemical reaction which was discovered by the German chemist called Hans Goldschmidt in 1893. He discovered when you take aluminum, very finely divided as a powder, and you take rust or iron oxide. Rust is a kind of iron oxide. There are many iron oxides, but let's say rust. You make it into a powder, you mix these two powders. If you can make them react. The reaction is very violent, and elemental iron is formed in the process at a temperature approaching 2,500 degrees centigrade and beyond, which means that the molten iron is very useful. It can be used for welding, as Hans Goldsmith demonstrated, but it can also be used for destructing other iron and steel items, and now I'm talking about armor. So thermite has been used for military purposes in torpedoes and grenades for 80, 90 years. But it is not. The classical thermite is not an explosive. It is an incendiary. It works by means of heat, while an explosive works by means of force. An explosive, you have a chemical reaction where a gas is developed very fast, so you knock things apart. But an incendiary burns its way through whatever it's supposed to destroy. And now I'll demonstrate what thermite can do on a French car.
This is thermite. It's a powdered mixture of iron oxide and aluminium, which when ignited burns at 2,500 degrees Celsius, which is very, very hot.
I did do that.
This is
from the top. Is that me? No. Er det screensaver? Vi starter bare igen. Ready?
This is thermite. It's a powdered mixture of iron oxide and aluminium, which when ignited burns at 2,500 degrees Celsius, which is very, very hot. This is a car. It's been specially chosen to be destroyed because it's old, it's white, but more importantly, because it's French. The engine block is the densest part of the car. It's basically a huge lump of metal, and, well, it's very hard to melt. Lucky then, the Brainiacs have plenty of thermite, specially packed into the slow-release mechanism of a garden flower pot. A big pile on the bonnet directly over the engine block should do the trick. Time to light the fuse and give this homage to French engineering the send-off it so richly deserves. The irreversible thermite reaction begins.
Okay, what you'll see here is the thermite is actually getting its way down through the car, and you'll see that it's pouring out underneath. You see the molten iron is going right through the motor block. But why we lost the sound, I don't know. So I guess that will do for now. So what Stephen E. Jones did, then he fired a thermite reaction in the corner of his lab and recovered. What you see here is the other product of the thermite reaction. This is aluminum oxide. It's white. You will need this in a few minutes to remember that. And so he recovered the ashes from the thermite reaction, just like you saw in the French car. Let me mention, I've shown this in London several times, and the audience found it outrageously funny. And I've also shown it for a French-speaking audience in Switzerland, and they didn't find it funny at all. I don't know if any of you is writing per shows. But at least Jones is doing exactly the same experiment in the corner of his lab here. He's recovering the ashes after the reaction, looking at it into the electron microscope. And this is what you see from the commercial thermite. You can buy this. It's not recommendable, but you can buy this, and you recognize exactly the same spherical iron particles as the picture I showed you before from the World Trade Center dust. And we have means for, I wonder if I have thrown it, yeah, I've thrown that picture. We have means to make sure that it is the same material. It is called energy dispersive spectroscopy, where we are directing a beam of electrons, and this we can do more accurately than 10,000ths of a millimeter. A beam of electrons on one of these spheres, and the material sends out X-rays, which are being analyzed, and from that analysis, we can tell which elements are at the spot where the electrons hit. This is called a spectrum. What you see here is revealed from one of these here. Fe means iron, Ca means calcium, K means potassium, Si is silicon, Al is aluminum, magnesium, and sodium. And you recognize exactly the same elements in the spheres from the World Trade Center dust. You see iron, you see calcium. I'll return to this one in a while. Silicon, aluminum, and magnesium. This is a fingerprint. It's the same material. And then there's a little peak here. This is sulfur. It originates from wallboard, which the formula for which is calcium sulfate, because the core of the towers were packed in wallboard, gypsum, and it was completely pulverized. So this is actually a contamination on the surface of these particles from wallboard, and not very interesting in this context. Now, the question now is, could there be any remnants of unreacted thermite in the dust? I'll go through this maybe a little quickly. And yes, Jones, he looked more into the dust and he found what we call red-gray chips. The biggest of these I'm showing here is 2 millimeters in length, but most of them are less than a millimeter. You really need a microscope to observe them. I think I skipped the picture, didn't I? Here? No. But eventually, after this Jones preliminary discovery, there was gathered, I made a little unit, a little team of scientists who worked investigating these chips for 1.5 years actually. So a paper came out on April 3rd in 2009, where yours sincerely, accidentally ended up as first author here. And so I'll very quickly give you the highlights of here. These are the red-gray chips as they were found in 4 independent samples with a very thorough chain of custody. And here, this is an electron microscope picture of one of the chips to give you the dimensions. This is the thickness of a chip. This is 1/10 of a millimeter. It's an electron microscope. There are no pictures in electron microscope. So I had to tell you that this is the red side, this is the gray side. The most important of our findings is that these chips are still reactive, some of them. Some of them have reacted, obviously. And they were in the first picture, I showed you all those. But some of them are still reactive, meaning that when you heat them up, they take off. It is not very easy to demonstrate because they are so ridiculously small. So you have to believe me here, the experimentalist there's a little chip lying to the left of this microtorch, which is moving from right to left. So when it hit the chip, there's a yellow flame, and actually a particle was expelled from the reaction. He could feel it on his finger. He couldn't find the particle afterwards. So what we do is, I should say that this is a lucky find from the dust, because this is a red-gray chip which is half reacted. It's wonderful to find one of these, because there you can see that the ionosphere is actually still clinging to the half-reacted chip. This is a chip which have reacted from the flame tests from the laboratory. This is what we produced. This is a finding from the dust. And this is a sphere from the dust made. This is irrelevant, actually. You have seen this already. I'll skip this. But what you take the little chip and you put them into an instrument called a differential scaling calorimeter. This is a device which measures the heat being developed from whatever is happening within the cavity. So we put the chip into the instrument, 100 degrees, we heat it up, 200 degrees, 300 degrees, 400 degrees, 430 degrees, it says, poof! and the needle bends because something happens very, very rapidly, and it's going off scale, obviously. And then we take the chips out of this instrument when it has reacted. This is what you see to your left. And there you can recognize these metal spheres here and here. Some of the spheres are transparent, these are silicate. But some of them are metallic, obviously, and this is the iron spheres, and we can identify them with the technology I've just described. What you see to the right, actually, is the result from a live experiment, which I'll show you in a little while. Because what we are dealing with here is thermite, but it has nothing to do, it has something to do, but it does not resemble what you saw on the French car. What you saw on the French car was good old Goldschmidt's thermite, more than 100 years old, where you simply have the powder and you mixed it. This is a modern material where the ingredients has been mixed by using nanotechnological methods in a polymer matrix, that is, they're lying in a polymer. It has many consequences and advantages, which I will not go into detail in, but it is still thermite. Maybe it's not used for cutting the steel beams, but that is another story. So what I suggest, I'll give you, and I haven't shown this to very many people, speculating on collapse scenarios, and really, maybe I shouldn't do this, but I'll do it anyhow. What I imagine, we have seen explosives have been used. There's other evidence which I have not had time to use to tell you about, that the steel beams of World Trade Center were cut by another variety of thermite called thermate. And this is also used for military purposes, where you take this mixture and you throw in sulfur and another chemical called barium nitrate, which makes it much more efficient of cutting steel beams. It goes through steel beams like a hot knife goes through butter. And there is independent evidence proven that some of the steel beams have been subjected to thermite cutting. So where do the red gray chips fit in? Well, I'll show you now. This is the picture of what's happening here, where you see everything is going in all directions. Please notice that all these fragments are carrying a white smoke trail. This is not wallboard. This is not concrete. It will never come out as a complete homogeneous white smoke trail. I believe it's aluminum oxide. It's the other product of the thermite reaction. And now we are touching into energetic materials, where there are three fundamental groups. Energetic materials are materials which can do work. Incendiaries are working by means of heat. Explosives are working by means of force. But in between, you have something called propellants. And these are materials which react slower than explosives, but faster than incendiaries. And actually, the second, what you call step in the space shuttle rocket, we're working on nano incendiaries, a compound called ammonium perchlorate. So you're using nanomaterials as rocket fuel. And what I actually suggest here is I'll show you a little video of the South Tower exploding. And there you'll see, among other interesting things, there are no subtitles on this in Danish, so I'll go through it. You'll see for once explosions in the tower above the point where the plane impacts. So I mean, then you're finished. There's nothing to talk about now, okay? You'll also see that the top section of the South Tower, it starts tilting to the east. It starts going like that. And then it should fall to the ground in one piece. It doesn't. It, say, poofs in open air. But that's not why I'm showing this video here, because you'll see fragments which are moving to the ground faster than free fall. How can anything move to the ground faster than free fall? Because it means you have to put work into it. It is possible if you fire a rocket down to the ground. Then it will move faster than free fall. You will also see another fragment coming out of the South Tower, and then it changes direction 90 degrees. It comes out like this, and then it goes zoop, and suddenly decides to make a right turn. Instead of what particles usually do, they go like that, but this one comes out and suddenly makes a right turn. This is highly suspicious. It is very much shorter than the other one. It's only a couple of minutes, and I'll be finished very soon.
This is the destruction of the South Tower of the World Trade Center, viewed from a helicopter to the south. This particular video clip is rich in details that call the official story into question. Notice the numerous explosions on the west side of the building above the impact point. As the top 30-floor section falls, it tips to the east. It starts off intact, but then it disintegrates in midair. Gravity alone could not cause the top section to disintegrate. When an object is in free fall, there are no internal stresses. It should have hit the ground in one piece, but it didn't. Some of the debris is clearly being accelerated by forces other than gravity. These effects can be caused by late firing explosives, which can produce a white smoke trail. White smoke, consisting of aluminum oxide, is a byproduct of the thermite reaction. While producing this video, I ran across one rocket projectile I had not seen commented on before. This one stopped midair and changed directions. Even taking perspective effects into account, this projectile lost one component of momentum and gained another. That requires an impulse. Note that the rocket trail does not point back to the building, but the point where the impulse occurred. Let's take it from the top. There's a lot going on. Watch for the smoking guns.
Okay. And in the last minutes of my presentation today, I will address some health aspects of the dust and what happened to the first responders, because they were really not working under conditions which would be accepted by the Danish, what you call it, Arbejdstilsynet, Working Protection Agency. It took them 3 months to put out the fires on ground zero. It was a hellish brew of chemical reactions. Actually, I can make a 2-hour presentation on this subject alone, on the emissions which were recorded the data in the fall of 2001, because there was like volcanoes coming out of the ground of strange chemicals. Something was really going on down there. And they poured millions of gallons of water on it, constantly. They used a synthetic fire depressant called pyrocool. They just couldn't put a lid on the fires. So it wasn't officially extinguished until December the 20th, but believe me, things were happening still into February. And this is the air that the first responders were breathing. Not very healthy. For many reasons, which I do not have time to go into. I will zoom in on a medical study carried out about Mount Sinai Hospital, which is a huge hospital and medical school on Manhattan, very respectable. Now we are talking about the total number of people being exposed to the World Trade Center dust is between 60 and 70,000. And maybe some of you are aware that they have become ill by the thousands, and the reluctance of the government to give them medical treatment and aid is downright disgusting. At least, let me tell you this. Finally, last year, I think, they finally passed a law according to which these people, some of them are dying of strange diseases and cancers, should be helped, aided for their medical expenses. But in the last minute, it was put into the law that if a person shows up on the Department of Home Security's list of what you call suspected persons, which is about 400,000 or 500,000 people have their name on Homeland Security lists for as suspicious. If somebody gets their name on that list, they're automatically deprived of any help, which means that you have totally gagged all first responders. It's so mean. It's so disgusting. I'll show you just a little, maybe academic footnote, which on this health situation of these people. And this relates to a study, a case report, which came out in 2010 from the Mount Sinai Hospital, where these respected doctors have looked into the lung tissue of some of these people who became ill. And they found, among all the other crap, some very interesting particles, which has been mentioned yesterday here at the conference. And these are these small, very, very long and very, very thin particles. What is this? They found the same particles in the World Trade Center dust. And they are being identified by comparing with an authentic sample of here carbon nanotubes. It was mentioned that carbon nanotubes, which is a material which consists of carbon in a tube, very, very small, and you have single-walled carbon nanotubes. There are a few nanometers across, but they can be many hundreds of nanometers, actually millimeters, microns long. And so they're very, very thin, they're very, very long. They can, the multiple-walled nanotubes you have here, and these are electron microscopes showing these nanotubes. But they are very hard to degrade. They sit there for a long time. And I don't have time to show this, but there have recently been also medical investigations of the impact of carbon nanotubes, which also comes in, it's also a diesel exhaust. This is something we are breathing, but it sits in the lungs, and people are starting investigating actually the health effects of this. It works much the same way as asbestos. Now, it was found here in 4 out of the 7 patients in quite high amounts. This is also from the World Trade Center dust. I showed this is an independent sample. Of course, these people had controls. I mean, is this something you just find in everybody's lung tissue? No, because in Mount Sinai, they had a big bank of tissue, so they could compare it with construction workers who had suffered from asbestosis, and they also had healthy non-construction workers in their reference group, in their control group. So this is specific to the first responders, that you find carbon nanotubes in their lungs. Now, question is, where could this nanotubes come from? And I got the idea some time ago that it comes from the thermite for different reasons, because the nanothermite actually has all the conditions for the formation of nanotubes. You need very high temperature, you need a carbon source, which in our case is the polymer matrix, and you need a metal catalyst for which iron is the best. So we have all the conditions ready for formation of carbon nanotubes in the thermite reaction of the carbon nanotube. So I asked Kevin Ryan, a colleague of mine, to do an experiment in his back garden, because he can make nanothermite himself. We have a faint idea of how this material is made. We cannot make the original stuff because this is military secrecies. But the principles of fabrication are known and understood. So Kevin went into his back garden and prepared nanothermite and ignited it. It's a much longer video, which you can find on his homepage. I asked him to cut it down, and this is what you see. This is Kevin Ryan making nanothermite here. The solvent is methanol. Now he's throwing aluminum into the mix. He's actually taking it out. He's drying it. And now this is the dry nanothermite. He's putting in the bottom of a beaker. He's putting a lid on. This is on a hot plate, and now he's heating the hot plate. And that's it. Poof. Let's see it again. This sample from this experiment I had sent to me in Copenhagen. I extracted it with ethanol, it doesn't matter, put it on an electron microscope, and this is what I pulled out of the reaction mixture. This is carbon nanotubes. Here you see it again. This is a magnification. They're about 1,000 nanometers across here. This is 1 micron. They're very long and they're very thin. For identification, we do again, these are raw data. You see this is a carbon peak, it's all to the left. This is completely irrelevant because this is the copper grid on which the nanotubes were lying. So they contain carbon, and that is it. This is another extraction from Kevin's reaction mixture, and you see the carbon nanotubes. So this is another electron microscope picture. And again, identification. There's some aluminum in also, which there should be. This is probably aluminum oxide lying here in the middle. And so this is comparison. This is from the lung tissue of the first responders. And this is from my electron microscope at the University of Copenhagen. And the only regret I have here is I haven't had time to write this one thing up. Hopefully I'll get time to do this during the fall, because these discoveries were done already a year ago, but this is haven't been published yet. Before I finish, I wish to draw your attention that we have put a table outside where you can get a handout with reliable websites, because you know there's so much disinformation out there. I don't have to tell. This is an enlightened crowd. I don't have to tell you all the disinformation there is. But I have a list of reliable websites. You can get a free DVD outside, which I must say is not for computer, this for what you have to put into your TV set. There's another DVD, The Experts Speak Out, which you have to pay 10 kroner for. David Chandler's work I also have on a special DVD. You can buy a Danish translation of David Ray Griffin's first book, The New Pearl Harbor, and we sell it for 100 kroner a piece. This is from a guy from Randers, north of here, and the publishing company. Of course, he went bankrupt immediately, so he had lost some other. You can get other papers in copy. Danes, if you are not aware of it, go and check a website called inthe11thhour.dk. Now, this is the goddess of justice. And she is usually depicted as blindfolded and holding a balance in one hand and a sword in the other hand. Science, at its finest, work by the same principles. We also we can definitely use a balance. We cannot use a sword, but we try to evaluate the evidence without prejudice, which is not so easy as it sounds. But this is what science should be. So justice is blind and science is blind, but we are not dumb. Thank you for your attention, and we still have some time. Yeah. I don't know, Frank. I haven't used my 90 minutes yet. So if you have any comments or any questions, please. Yes, please.
I was just curious if you've ever been challenged by any authorities or been in any way intimidated to be silent about these issues?
We are harassed permanently. I would not say, but the point is we're not challenged in the public domain. And because if they take the discussion into the public domain, they're losing. So it's all taking place, say, on our field. That is, they are infiltrating. They're coming to the party and spoiling the party, disrupting discussions. And I have chaperones, definitely. I know them by name, personally. We greet each other, following me. They don't even try to disguise. Of course, those who may be in disguise, I don't know, but some of them are quite open, harassing me at my presentations, showing up. But still, in Russia, lucky, this is still not Russia. In Russia, they just go out and shoot journalists if there are any problems. Here, they're spamming the field with disinformation, infiltration. That's how they work. And they admit that quite openly. Was his Chess Sunstein, who actually just retired from Barack Obama's Information Bureau department. He admitted quite openly that they should actually do more infiltration in the 9/11 truth movement. And some of it's to great success. I mean, we are fighting, they're establishing infights. And sometimes they're playing both parts of the fight. It's so funny. So they're fighting against each other. And if you see a dogfight, you have a tendency to come and join the fight eventually. So this is what is happening. But no real threats, no.
Actually, now I have two questions.
Please.
The first one is just from the answer of your last question. Are your harassers Danish?
Am I?
Are the people who are harassing you, are they Danish nationalities?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And other nationalities.
Okay. The actual question I had is it known what burned for 4.5 months?
No, we don't know what actually, it's still, we cannot account for the chemical processes going on ground zero. Because the emissions, the only hint you have to it is the emissions in the air. And these are reports from the Environmental Protection Agency, which were obtained by FOIAs. You really have to push them hard to come out with these numbers. And on specific days, they were just coming chemicals out of the ground like volcanoes. Some of them is maybe okay. I can drop names, styrene, benzene, toluene, stuff like that. But there's one specific chemical which is still puzzling us. It's called 1,3-diphenyl propane. And we cannot get how that possibly can be formed. We just know that something was going on. And there was reports of molten iron in the rubble. Plenty, and recordings, people were saying that they saw streams of molten iron, pools of molten iron. They were pulling out steel beams from the ground and it was dripping and it was glowing white from the end. The temperatures was outrageous in ground zero. We don't know what's happening.
Is there any possibility at all that the thermite could have been released from the planes?
Nope.
The thermite, as with the car, is there any possibility?
Yeah, that's another frequently asked questions. Here you come, the planes with the aluminum. Of course, you have an iron oxide as rust on the steel beams, but it's a fundamental misunderstanding that because you have two ingredients, you also have the thing. I mean, if you are in your kitchen and you have potatoes on one side and you have meat the other side, the stew does not make itself. You have to work on it to get them together. And the same thing here, these chemicals do not find together, and particularly not at high temperatures. You're working against something called entropy. The things do not come together spontaneously. You have to work to make the mixture, and then it can react. So there's no way thermite can be. You cannot form a reactive material at high temperatures.
I assume the goal by this investigation is holding someone responsible for this, and that would be probably through a court case. So my question is, how do you think it's going towards the court case, and why haven't we seen one for a long time? It's 10 years now, so we should have seen stronger initiatives to taking these people to court. So what do you think are they?
Yeah, now we're actually moving into the political domain, and maybe I should leave that to Ian Crane later today. But what is happening, definitely I'm very concerned for our civilization. And because what happened, particularly in the United States, is the whole, what you call judicial system, the courts is out, academia is out, the press is out. There is no institution left actually for restoring our democracy. So I believe that we are facing a civil war. And all the conditions preparing for civil war are in place. Earlier in the conference, we heard last evening about the National Defense Authorization Act. The military has been authorized actually to take everybody into custody, and the arms are there. They have ordered 1.4 rounds of ammunition. The Department of Homeland Security, they are ready. The tanks are rolling in St. Louis, in Austin. Black Hawks are in the air of Minneapolis. And they're gradually making the American people and the army used to operating in the homeland. So it's coming up. Taking people to court, no, I don't think so. This time have passed. Eventually, if the only, what you say, legal mechanism left is on the state level, and Mike Gravel, who is a very distinguished former senator from Alaska, he actually took the initiative last year to get 9/11 on the ballot on the elections here in 2012, and he actually felt he couldn't meet the deadlines in 10 different states, so he failed. But this is the only option actually still where American democracy might work, putting 9/11 on the ballot. But now there are 2 years to the next election, and 2 years is very short time compared with how fast events are developing these days.
Sorry to take you back to your presentation and the new evidence that you've presented here today. First, I would like to commend you on a very sober and sobering presentation. It was excellent, thank you. Could you repeat to me or explain to me in layman's terms how your recent discovery of the carbon fibers relate to the termites or to explosion? I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. What I can say, I'm going to publish this, and there will be no word of World Trade Center in this publication, because all it will say is that carbon nanotubes can be formed, and this is actually brand new. I hope to make it into Nature. Which is a very, very fine journal. This is brand new discovery that carbon nanotubes is formed in a thermite reaction, and that is all I can say. And then we could point at the coincidence that the first responders actually had their lungs filled with carbon nanotubes, and that carbon nanotubes eventually could be made during the collapses of the towers. But you cannot repeat the experiment. You could just point, this is just one among hundreds of coincidences, which are the list is so ridiculously long of coincidences, things that coincidentally happened on that day. And that's all you can do, actually. It's not a one-to-one scientific proof. But of course, I believe this is what happened because this is the only place you find it. In these concentrations, carbon nanotubes are abundant also in our environment. It's formed in diesel exhaust, but not in amounts compared to this. And ordinary people, we don't have carbon nanotubes in our lungs. But the first responders do. So, and what I might hope, this is all about consciousness and awareness and publicity and raising a storm and raising a dust. That's what we are working on. Maybe I should ask to my former answer, our job is to reach critical mass before the social events come. It will be a tsunami of social events. And the 1930s will look like a summer camp in comparison for 3 reasons. Because the American society, they do not have any production. They cannot produce anything anymore. They do not have natural resources. And what was the third thing they're deprived of? The middle class is gone. I think it will be a lot more different. The Americans cannot heal themselves because they have been deprived of what they had in the 30s. So they had oil, for instance. They had resources. It has been depleted as well. So it's going to be rough. And our job here is to reach critical mass to such an event that we can surf on the top of the tsunami and bring consciousness and understanding how things are connected, because everything discussed on this conference, in my opinion, is connected. I'm just playing the role of the scientist presenting solid evidence. That's my job. But I think everything is connected. And so I'm just going building 7, and you talk the other stories. We have to reach critical mass so we can surf on the top of this wave which will come and eventually initiate the shift of paradigm, which is our only hope. And if we fail, it is very gloomy.